Alexander Sterling had built his empire on precision. Every detail of his life operated like clockwork, from the temperature of his morning coffee to the exact angle his newspapers were placed on the breakfast table. At 33, he'd already amassed more wealth than most could spend in 10 lifetimes, but what he valued most was order, control, predictability, which was why the muddy footprints scattered across his pristine marble hallway felt like a personal affront. Alexander stood in the doorway of his penthouse, briefcase in hand, staring at the tiny brown prints that led from the service entrance toward the kitchen. They were small, impossibly small, each one no bigger than his palm. A child's footprints. But there shouldn't be any children in his home. His jaw tightened as he followed the trail with his eyes, noting how they zigzagged across the expensive Italian marble he'd imported specifically for its flawless white surface. Each print was a stark reminder that something in his carefully controlled world had gone wrong. "Maria?" His voice echoed through the apartment, sharp and commanding. Silence answered him. Alexander checked his watch. It was 7:47 p.m., later than he usually returned from the office, but his head housekeeper should still be here. Unless she'd already left for the evening, which meant one of the other staff members was responsible for this mess. He set down his briefcase with deliberate care and began following the footprints. They led him past the formal living room, the dining area with its table that could seat 16 but had only ever seated him, and into the kitchen. The trail continued, small prints mixing with smears where tiny hands had apparently touched the walls. That's when he heard it. A child's laughter, bright and bubbling, coming from the direction of the staff quarters. Alexander rarely ventured into that section of his home. It seemed unnecessary. The staff had their space, he had his, and that separation maintained the professional boundaries he preferred. But now he found himself walking down the narrow hallway, following both the footprints and the sound of that infectious giggle. The door to one of the rooms stood ajar. Through the gap, Alexander could see movement and hear a woman's voice, soft and melodic, speaking in rapid Spanish mixed with English. "Elena, mi amor, we need to clean your feet. Please, Bibi, just sit still for one moment." Alexander pushed the door open wider. The scene before him was chaos incarnate, at least by his standards. A small child, her dark curls wild and tangled, was dancing around the modest room wearing nothing but a diaper and an oversized t-shirt covered in cartoon characters. Her feet were caked with mud, and she was giggling uncontrollably as she evaded the young woman trying to catch her with a damp towel. The woman was Rosa Delgado, one of his housekeepers. He'd hired her 8 months ago, though he'd barely spoken more than a handful of words to her in all that time. She was efficient, quiet, and stayed out of his way, which was exactly what he required of his staff. But he certainly hadn't known she had a child. Rosa's eyes widened the moment she saw him standing in the doorway. The color drained from her face, and she immediately scooped up the little girl, holding her close despite the mud that was now transferring to her own uniform. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. I can explain." Her voice trembled, and he saw her arms tighten protectively around the child. The little girl, however, seemed entirely unafraid. She peered at Alexander with enormous brown eyes, a smile still playing at the corners of her mouth. "Hi," she chirped, waving one muddy hand at him. Alexander stood frozen, caught between his instinct to demand an explanation and something else, something unfamiliar that stirred in his chest at the sight of that innocent face. "There are muddy footprints throughout my hallway," he said, his voice colder than he'd intended. "Care to explain?" Rosa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "The daycare called. Elena was sick. They said I had to pick her up immediately. Maria told me it would be okay to bring her here, just for a few hours until my shift ended. I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling." I took her to the service courtyard, but it rained earlier, and I didn't realize there was mud, and she ran inside before I could stop her, and she ran faster than you could catch her? Alexander's eyebrow arched skeptically as he looked at the tiny child in Rose's arms. Despite her obvious distress, a small smile flickered across Rose's face. She's very fast when she wants to be. As if to prove the point, Elena squirmed in her mother's grip, reaching her arms toward Alexander.
Down, down.
I go say hi. No, Phoebe, we're in very big trouble. Rose's voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she looked up at Alexander with fear evident in her warm brown eyes. Eyes that reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. Please, Mr. Sterling. This won't happen again. I'll clean everything. I'll stay as late as needed. Please don't fire me. I need this job. The desperation in her voice struck something in him that he'd long thought buried. Alexander had spent years building walls around himself, keeping his distance from emotional entanglements that could compromise his focus. But standing there, watching this young mother plead for her livelihood while her daughter smiled at him with complete trust, something in those walls cracked. How old is she? The question came out before he could stop it. Rosa blinked, clearly surprised by the question.
3.
She just turned 3 last month. 3 years old. The same age his daughter would have been if she'd lived. If everything hadn't fallen apart 7 years ago. Alexander pushed the thought away viciously. That was the past. This was simply a problem that needed solving, a situation that needed to be managed. The footprints, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Show me the extent of the damage. Rosa's face fell. She thought he was assessing how much she'd have to pay for repairs, he realized.
Good. Let her think that.
It was easier than explaining the actual tangle of emotions he was feeling. I'll show you, she whispered, setting Elena down on the bed and quickly wiping the child's feet with a towel. Stay here, mi amor. Don't move. But as Rosa moved to follow Alexander out of the room, Elena's face crumpled. Mama. Don't go. The child's cry was so full of genuine distress that Alexander found himself stopping in the doorway. He watched as Rosa turned back, torn between obeying her employer and comforting her daughter. Bring her, Alexander heard himself say. Just keep her feet off the floor. The look of stunned gratitude on Rosa's face was almost painful to witness. Alexander walked slowly through his penthouse, allowing Rosa to keep pace while carrying Elena. He found himself looking at the muddy footprints differently now. They weren't quite as chaotic as he'd initially thought. There was a pattern to them, the wandering exploration of a curious child discovering new territory. Tell me how this happened, he said, stopping in the middle of the hallway where the footprints were most concentrated. All of it. Rosa shifted Elena's weight in her arms. The little girl had quieted, her head resting on her mother's shoulder, studying Alexander with those huge, solemn eyes. I started working for you 8 months ago, Rosa began, her voice soft. Before that, I was working 2 jobs, trying to save enough to get Elena and me into a better apartment. The building we were in, it wasn't safe. There were break-ins, drugs in the hallways. I was terrified every time I left her with a neighbor while I worked. Alexander listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the footprints. When Maria hired me, it felt like a miracle. The pay was enough that I could work just 1 job, and I could afford a better place. Elena started at a good daycare, one where I didn't worry about her all day. Everything was finally getting better. Rosa's voice wavered slightly. But today the daycare called. Elena had a fever, they said. I had to pick her up immediately. It's their policy. I tried calling my neighbor, my aunt, anyone who could watch her, but no one was available. So you brought her here. It wasn't a question. Maria said it would be okay just this once. She said you never came home before 8, and I would be done by 7:30. I thought I could keep Elena in my room, that she'd stay quiet. But she was feeling better by the time we got here, and she's so curious about everything. I turned my back for just a moment to get her some crackers from my bag, and she was gone. Elena chose that moment to pipe up. I wanted to explore, she announced proudly. Like Dora. Despite everything, Alexander felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Dora the Explorer? Her current obsession, Rosa confirmed, a hint of motherly exasperation creeping into her voice despite her obvious anxiety. She watches it every morning while I get ready for work. They'd reached the kitchen, where the footprints made a loop around the island before heading back toward the hallway. Alexander could picture it now, the little girl running through these rooms that must have seemed enormous to her, everything new and exciting. Mr. Sterling, Rosa said quietly, I know this is inexcusable. I brought my personal life into your home without permission. I let my daughter damage your property. I completely understand if you want to fire me. I just ask that you let me clean everything first and that you don't pursue any legal action. I can't afford. Stop. Alexander held up a hand. He turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd left her room. I'm not going to fire you, Rosa. The relief that flooded her face was so profound that her knees actually seemed to buckle slightly. You're not. But we need to discuss some changes. The relief vanished, replaced by wariness. Changes? Alexander looked at Elena, who was watching him with that unnervingly direct gaze that children seem to possess. Up close, he could see that her cheeks were slightly flushed, probably from the remnants of her fever. She looked tired, despite her earlier burst of energy. You said she's at daycare while you work? Rosa nodded slowly, uncertain where this was going. What are the hours? 6 in the morning until 6 at night. And what time does your shift start here? 7 a.m. I drop her off and then take the bus. If everything runs on time, I get here right at 7. Alexander did the mental calculation. That's a 13-hour day for a 3-year-old. Rosa's chin lifted slightly, defensiveness creeping into her posture. She's happy there. The teachers are good to her. It's safe. I'm not criticizing your choices, Alexander said, though he could see from her expression that she didn't believe him. I'm asking because I want to understand the situation before I make a proposal. A proposal? Alexander walked over to the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for Rosa to do the same. She did, settling Elena in her lap. The little girl immediately began playing with the buttons on her mother's uniform, humming softly to herself. I was married once, Alexander found himself saying, the words surprising him even as they left his mouth.
He never talked about this.
Never. But something about this moment, about the child in front of him, loosened the tight grip he kept on those memories. We had a daughter. She would have been close to Elena's age now. Rosa's eyes widened. Would have been. There were complications during the delivery. My wife hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop the bleeding. The words came out flat, emotionless, because that was the only way he could say them without falling apart. They managed to save my daughter, Charlotte. She lived for 6 hours. Long enough for me to hold her, to tell her I loved her. And then she was gone too. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry, Rosa whispered, her eyes bright with tears. One hand instinctively cradled Elena closer. After that, I built this. Alexander gestured vaguely at the penthouse around them. This life where everything was controlled, where nothing unexpected could happen, where I wouldn't have to feel like that ever again. He looked at the muddy footprints leading across his pristine floor. And then a 3-year-old girl left muddy footprints in my hallway. I really am sorry. Don't be. Alexander's voice was firm. Those footprints, Rosa, They're the first real thing that's happened in this apartment in 7 years. The first sign that something alive and spontaneous and genuine existed here, even for a few minutes. Elena had stopped playing with the buttons and was watching him again, her small face serious. Then, without warning, she reached out toward him with muddy hands. "You sad," she said simply. "You need hug." Rosa gasped, pulling Elena's hands back. "Elena, no. We don't touch Mr. Sterling." "I'm so sorry. She's very affectionate. She doesn't understand." But Alexander had already leaned forward, close enough that Elena could reach him, if she wanted. "Is that right?" he asked the little girl softly. "Do I need a hug?" Elena nodded solemnly. "Hugs make everything better. Mama says so." Over the following weeks, Alexander found his rigid routine becoming more flexible. He started coming home earlier, usually arriving around 6 p.m. instead of his previous 8 or 9 o'clock. He told himself it was because he wanted to ensure the new arrangement was working smoothly, but deep down, he knew the truth. He wanted to hear Elena's laughter echoing through his apartment. He wanted to see what new drawings she'd created, what elaborate story she'd invented, what question about the world she'd asked her mother that day. One evening, about 3 weeks after Elena started spending her days in the penthouse, Alexander came home to find her sitting at his kitchen counter, her little legs swinging as she carefully colored in a picture. Rosa was preparing dinner, something that smelled infinitely better than the takeout Alexander usually subsisted on. "Hi, Alexander." Elena called out when she saw him, using his first name with the ease of a child who knew no fear of authority. "Look what I made you." She held up a drawing that was mostly enthusiastic scribbles in various colors, though he could make out what might have been a person and what was definitely meant to be a sun. "That's beautiful," he said, setting down his briefcase and walking over to examine it more closely. "Tell me about it." Elena's face lit up. She loved nothing more than explaining her artwork. "This is you." She pointed to the Talish figure. "And this is me. And this is the sun because it's happy. And these are the magic flowers that grow when people are friends." Something in Alexander's chest squeezed tight. "We're friends." "Yes." Elena said this as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're my best friend, who's a grown-up. Mama is my best friend, who's my mama. And Lucy from before daycare is my best friend, who's a kid." "I'm honored," Alexander said, and found that he genuinely meant it. He carefully took the drawing. "May I keep this?"
Yes.
"You should hang it in your office so you don't forget about me when you're working." "I could never forget about you, Elena." Rosa had turned from the stove, and Alexander caught the expression on her face. Tender, hopeful, and something else he couldn't quite name, but that made his heart beat faster. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the food. "Elena asked if we could have dinner before we go home, and I thought, well, there's plenty if you'd like to join us." Alexander never ate with his staff. It was an unspoken rule, one of many that maintained the professional distance he preferred. But then again, he'd broken most of those rules already, hadn't he? "I'd like that," he said. Dinner was chaotic in the best possible way. Elena chattered constantly, telling Alexander about the cartoon she'd watched, the game she'd invented where all the cushions on the couch were islands and the floor was lava, and the very important question she'd been saving to ask him. "What's the important question?" Alexander asked, watching in amusement as Elena arranged her peas into a specific pattern before eating them. "Do you have a family?" Elena asked, her voice suddenly serious. "Mama says some people have big families and some people have small families. What size is yours?" The question hit him harder than he'd expected. Rosa looked stricken, clearly wishing she could take back whatever conversation had led to this. "I used to have a family," Alexander said slowly. "But they're not here anymore." Elena processed this with the stark honesty of childhood. Did they die? Elena! Rosa gasped. That's not polite to ask. It's okay, Alexander interrupted gently. He looked at Elena's open, curious face. Yes, they died. A long time ago. So now it's just me. Elena was quiet for a moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Then she climbed down from her chair, walked around the table to where Alexander sat, and placed one small hand on his arm. That's very sad, she said solemnly. But maybe you could be in our family? Mama says families are made of people who love each other. And I love you. So, you could be in our family if you want. Alexander felt his eyes burn with tears he hadn't shed in years. He looked helplessly at Rosa, who was crying openly, not even trying to hide it. I think I'd like that very much, he managed to say around the lump in his throat. Elena beamed and hugged his arm. Good. Now we're a family. That means you have to come to my birthday party next month. Mama is making a princess cake. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Later, after Elena had fallen asleep on the couch and Rosa had carried her to the West Wing room to nap before taking her home, Alexander and Rosa stood together in his kitchen. The dinner dishes were washed and put away, and the apartment was quiet except for the soft sound of Elena's breathing from the other room. I don't know how to thank you, Rosa said softly, for all of this, for being so kind to her, to us. You don't need to thank me. Alexander found himself moving closer to her, drawn by something he couldn't name. If anything, I should thank you. For what? For bringing life back into this place. Into my life. He gestured around the penthouse, which somehow looked different now. Warmer. More like a home. I didn't realize how empty everything had become until Elena left those footprints in my hallway. Rosa smiled, that beautiful warm smile that had started appearing more often. She does have a way of making her presence known. She does. Alexander hesitated, then took a chance. Rosa, I know this started as just an arrangement to help you with childcare, but it's become something more for me. Having you both here, it's changed everything. Rosa finished softly. I know. For me too. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, the air between them charged with possibility. Alexander wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and tell her that she and Elena had somehow healed wounds he thought would never close. But it was too soon, too fast, too much at once. So instead, he just took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. We should probably take this slowly, he said. Figure out what this is. Slowly is good, Rosa agreed, though her thumb was tracing circles on the back of his hand in a way that made his heart race. Elena comes first. She has to be okay with anything that happens. Agreed. Though based on her declaration that I'm part of your family now, I think she's already decided. Rosa laughed softly. She's very decisive when she wants to be. From the other room, they heard Elena stir and call out sleepily. Mama? Alexander? Where are you? They looked at each other and smiled, and Alexander felt something settle in his chest. Something that felt like peace, like home. Coming, Bibi, Rosa called back, but she squeezed Alexander's hand once more before letting go. As they walked together toward the room where Elena was waking up, Alexander realized that his carefully controlled life had been completely upended by a 3-year-old girl and her beautiful mother. And he'd never been happier. It was Maria who first brought Alexander the news, her face grave as she knocked on his home office door one Saturday afternoon. Mr. Sterling, I need to speak with you about Rosa. Alexander looked up from his laptop, immediately sensing something was wrong. It was unusual for Maria to seek him out on weekends, and the formal use of his title put him on edge. What about her? Is she all right? That's what I'm not sure about. Maria closed the door behind her. I'm telling you this because I know you've become close with her and Elena. Someone needs to know what she's dealing with. A cold feeling settled in Alexander's stomach. Tell me. Rosa's ex-boyfriend, Elena's father, was released from prison 2 weeks ago. He's been trying to contact her. He came to her apartment building yesterday. Alexander was on his feet before Maria finished speaking. Is she safe? Is Elena safe?
For now, yes.
Rosa has been staying with her aunt, but she can't do that indefinitely. The aunt's apartment is too small, and Rosa doesn't want to impose. Maria paused. There's something else. The ex, his name is Marcus Reyes. He's demanding to see Elena, claiming he has parental rights. Does he? Alexander's voice was sharp, his mind already cataloging potential legal solutions. Rosa was never married to him. His name isn't on Elena's birth certificate. But that doesn't mean he couldn't cause trouble if he wanted to. Maria met his eyes directly. Rosa hasn't been to work for 2 days because she's scared to leave Elena with anyone, scared he might try to take her. She called me this morning, apologizing, asking if she could have some unpaid leave until she figures out what to do. Alexander was already reaching for his phone. Where is she now? Still at her aunt's place in Queens. Mr. Sterling, I know this isn't your problem, but it absolutely is my problem. Alexander's tone left no room for argument. Maria, do me a favor. Call Rosa and tell her I'm sending a car to pick her and Elena up. They're staying here until this situation is resolved. Maria looked relieved. I was hoping you'd say something like that. I'll call her now. And Maria? Thank you for telling me. After Maria left, Alexander made several phone calls. First to his head of security, arranging for additional protection and a full background check on Marcus Reyes. Then to his lawyer, one of the best family law attorneys in New York, briefing her on the situation and asking what options were available to protect Rosa and Elena. By the time the car returned with Rosa and Elena 2 hours later, Alexander had already made up the master guest suite for them and had security personnel stationed discreetly around the building. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of Rosa when she walked through his door. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usual warmth replaced by a brittleness that made his heart ache. Elena was clutching her mother's hand tightly, her normally bright demeanor subdued. Alexander. Elena ran to him as soon as she saw him, and he caught her up in his arms. Hey there, princess. I heard you're having a sleepover here tonight. Mama says we have to stay here because it's safer. Elena's voice was quieter than usual. Is someone bad trying to hurt us? Alexander looked over her head at Rosa, who had tears streaming silently down her face. He made a decision in that moment. No one is going to hurt you, he said firmly to Elena. Not while I'm here. I promise. You promise? I promise. In fact, I triple promise, which is the most serious kind of promise there is. Elena seemed satisfied with this. Okay. Can I go see my room? Of course. Why don't you go pick out a movie to watch, and I'll make us some popcorn in a little bit. Elena nodded and scampered off toward the West Wing. As soon as she was out of earshot, Rosa's composure crumbled completely. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't go home, and my aunt's place isn't safe, and I was so scared. Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. You did exactly the right thing. You're safe here. Elena is safe here. I won't let anything happen to either of you. You don't understand what he's like. Rosa's words were muffled against his chest. Marcus, when I met him, he seemed wonderful, charming, attentive. But after I got pregnant, everything changed. He became controlling, jealous. He accused me of cheating, of trying to trap him. When I told him I was keeping the baby, She broke off, shaking. He what? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. He hit me. Just once, but it was enough. I left that night. I was 6 months pregnant, and I left with just my clothes and my savings. I moved in with my aunt and filed a restraining order. Rosa pulled back to look at him. But then Marcus got arrested for assault. Not against me, against someone else. He went to prison for 5 years. I thought I was safe. I thought Elena would never have to know him. How did he find you? I don't know. Maybe through my aunt's building, or maybe he followed me from the daycare. He sent me a message through a friend, saying he wants to meet his daughter. Saying he's changed, that prison made him a better man, that he has rights. Rosa's hands clenched into fists. But I know him, Alexander. He doesn't want Elena, because he loves her. He wants to hurt me for leaving, and the best way to hurt me is through her. Alexander felt a rage building in him that he'd never experienced before. It was protective and fierce and absolutely unwavering. My lawyer is already working on this, he said. His name isn't on the birth certificate, which helps. And with his criminal record, especially for violence, we can make a strong case that he shouldn't have unsupervised access, even if he does pursue legal action. I can't afford a lawyer like that. I can barely afford. You're not paying for anything. This is handled. When Rosa started to protest, Alexander gently took her face in his hands. Rosa, listen to me. You and Elena, you've become. You're important to me. More important than I knew how to say. There is nothing I wouldn't do to keep you both safe. This isn't your responsibility, Rosa whispered, but her eyes were searching his face, looking for something. It is if I'm part of your family. Isn't that what Elena said? That families take care of each other. Alexander. Rosa was crying again, but this time she was smiling through the tears. I love you too. I was afraid to say it, afraid that this was all too good to be real, that I'd wake up and it would be gone. I'm real. This is real. And I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her then, soft and gentle, a promise and a beginning all at once. They were interrupted by Elena calling from the other room. I picked Moana. Come watch. Rosa laughed, wiping her tears. We should go. She gets very particular about people watching movies with her from the beginning. Wouldn't want to miss a crucial moment of the film, Alexander agreed. But he caught Rosa's hand as they walked toward the living room. We're going to figure this out. All of it. Together. Together, Rosa repeated and squeezed his hand. That night, after they'd watched Moana twice at Elena's insistence, after they'd had dinner and Elena had finally fallen asleep in the guest suite with Rosa beside her, Alexander sat in his office reviewing all the information his security team had compiled on Marcus Reyes. The picture it painted was not encouraging. Multiple arrests, a history of violence, associations with some dangerous people. But there was also something else in the report, something that made Alexander reach for his phone. Did you find it? He asked when his head of security answered. We did. Reyes violated his parole 3 days ago. Failed to report to his parole officer. There's a warrant out for his arrest. So, if he shows up anywhere, he can be arrested on site. I've already made contact with the NYPD to alert them to the situation and your address. They're keeping an eye out. Good. Alexander felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Keep me updated on any movements. He hung up and turned to find Rosa standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of his robes. Is Elena okay? He asked immediately. Sound asleep. She feels safe here. Rosa moved into the room. You're working on this, aren't you? On the Marcus situation. I am. And I have some good news. He explained about the parole violation. Rosa sagged with relief. So, he might be arrested before he can even try to see Elena? That's the hope. And even if he's not, we're ready. I've hired additional security, alerted the police, and my lawyer is prepared to file for an emergency protective order if needed. Why are you doing all this? I mean, I know you said you love me, but it's so much. Alexander stood and walked over to her. Do you know what I thought about when I first saw those muddy footprints? That your housekeeper had made a terrible mistake? That someone had disrupted my perfect, controlled world. I was angry about it. He took her hands. But you know what I think now when I see them? They're still there, faint marks that didn't quite come out of the marble. They are? I scrubbed so hard. I'm glad they didn't come out entirely, because every time I see them, I remember that there's more to life than control and perfection. I remember that the best things are messy and spontaneous, and sometimes leave marks that don't wash away. He pulled her closer. You and Elena have left marks on my life, Rosa. Good marks. The kind I never want to wash away. Rosa kissed him, deep and full of emotion. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You trusted me with your daughter. With your heart. That's everything. They stood together in the quiet office, holding each other, and Alexander felt the last of his walls crumble away. He'd spent 7 years trying to avoid feeling this vulnerable, this open to potential pain. But standing here with Rosa in his arms, knowing Elena was sleeping safely down the hall, he understood that love was worth the risk. Some footprints were meant to be followed, even when you didn't know where they'd lead. The arrest of Marcus Reyes happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Rosa and Elena had moved into Alexander's penthouse. He was picked up during a routine traffic stop, the officer recognizing his name from the parole violation warrant. Alexander got the call from his security team while he was in a meeting. He immediately excused himself and called Rosa. He's in custody, he told her without preamble. They got him this morning. The sob of relief on the other end of the line made his chest tight. Are you sure? They're certain it's him. Positive. And my lawyer has already filed the protective order. By the time he makes bail, if he makes bail, there will be a legal order preventing him from coming within 500 feet of you or Elena. Alexander, I thank you. Thank you so much. I'm coming home, he said, already gathering his things. We should celebrate. You don't have to. I want to. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He made it in 20, taking the stairs 2 at a time up to the penthouse. He found Rosa and Elena in the kitchen baking cookies. Elena was covered in flour, and Rosa wasn't much better, and the kitchen was an absolute disaster. It was the most beautiful thing Alexander had ever seen. Alexander. Elena launched herself at him, leaving floury handprints all over his suit. We're making chocolate chip cookies because Mama is happy. I can see that. He caught Rosa's eye over Elena's head. She was smiling, really smiling, the fear and tension that had shadowed her face for days finally gone. Are you happy too? Elena asked, pulling back to look at him seriously. I'm very happy. Then you should help make cookies. That's what happy people do. Alexander looked at his suit, already marked with flour, then at Rosa's hopeful expression, then at Elena's eager face. You know what? You're absolutely right. Happy people make cookies. He shrugged off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and for the next hour, he learned how to make cookies under the exacting supervision of a 3-year-old. He measured ingredients wrong, got chocolate on his shirt, and at one point, Elena declared his cookie rolling technique very silly, but also good. When the cookies finally came out of the oven, they sat together at the kitchen island, eating warm cookies and cold milk, and Alexander thought that this was what happiness felt like. Not the satisfaction of closing a business deal or the pride of a successful acquisition. This messy, imperfect, absolutely perfect moment. I need to tell you both something. Alexander said once Elena had finished her third cookie and was starting to show signs of a sugar-induced energy surge. Rosa looked at him with gentle concern. What is it? I've been thinking about the future. About what I want. He took a breath. Rosa, I don't want you to work as my housekeeper anymore. Her face fell.
Oh,
I understand. With everything that's happened, it's complicated now, and I can find another. I'm not explaining this right. Alexander took her hand. I don't want you to work as my housekeeper, because I want you to let me take care of you and Elena. Both of you. I want you to live here, not in the staff quarters, but here, with me, as my family. Rosa's eyes widened. Alexander, that's too much, I know. Too fast. But here's the thing. I've spent 7 years being careful, being cautious, keeping my distance from anything that could hurt me. And then Elena left muddy footprints in my hallway, and you came into my life, and I realized that being careful just means being alone. He squeezed her hand. I don't want to be alone anymore. I want to wake up to Elena's laughter. I want to have dinner with you, every night. I want to help with homework and attend dance recitals and argue about bedtimes and all of it. All of it. Rosa's voice was shaking, but she was smiling. All of it. The messy, chaotic, beautiful all of it. Mama, are you crying happy tears again? Elena had climbed into Rosa's lap and was patting her mother's face. Yes, Bibi. Very happy tears. Does that mean we get to stay in the castle? Alexander laughed. Yes, princess. You get to stay in the castle. Forever and ever? He looked at Rosa, asking the question with his eyes. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Forever and ever, he confirmed. Elena cheered and demanded another cookie to celebrate, which Alexander provided before carrying her off to wash the flour out of her hair while Rosa cleaned up the kitchen. Later that night, after Elena was asleep, Alexander and Rosa stood on his balcony, overlooking the city. The lights of Manhattan spread out before them, millions of lives intersecting and connecting in ways both seen and unseen. Are you sure about this? Rosa asked quietly. It's a lot to take on. A ready-made family, all the complications that come with my past. I've never been more sure of anything. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. Do you know what I used to see when I looked at this view? What? My kingdom. My empire. Everything I'd built. All the success I'd achieved. I'd stand here and feel proud, but also empty. Like I was looking at something that belonged to someone else. He rested his chin on top of her head. Now, when I look at it, I see possibility. I see all the places we could take Elena on her birthday. I see the park where we could have picnics. I see our future together, spread out in lights. Rosa turned in his arms to face him. I love you so much. And I'm terrified. Of what? That this is too good. That something will go wrong. That I'll wake up and it will have been a dream. Then I'll just have to keep showing you it's real. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Every single day, I'll prove to you that this is real and solid and ours. Every single day. Every single day. They sealed the promise with a kiss, and in the distance, the city sparkled with possibility. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the same hallway where he'd first seen Elena's muddy footprints. They'd had the marble professionally cleaned several times since then, but if you looked closely in just the right light, you could still see the faintest shadows where the mud had stained. He'd stopped the cleaning service from trying to remove them entirely. You ready? Rosa called from Elena's room, now permanently converted from the West Wing guest space into a proper bedroom for a growing girl. Almost, he called back, adjusting his tie. They were having a party today, a celebration that was months overdue. Elena came running out first, wearing a white dress with flowers embroidered on the hem. She'd grown so much in the past months, her vocabulary expanding, her confidence blooming. She barely resembled the shy child who'd been afraid when Marcus had first threatened them. Marcus was in prison now, serving time for violating his parole and facing additional charges. He'd eventually signed papers terminating his parental rights in exchange for a reduced sentence. It had been Rose's idea to offer him the deal, and Alexander had been so proud of her strength in making that decision. "Do I look pretty?" Elena twirled, her dress fanning out around her. "You look beautiful," Alexander said honestly. "Just like your mama." Rosa emerged from the bedroom, and Alexander's breath caught. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, elegant and understated, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, though she was smiling. "We really are." Alexander pulled a small box from his pocket. "Though I realized I did things a bit backward the first time." 6 months ago, he'd asked Rosa to marry him on a random Tuesday evening while they were folding laundry together. It had been spontaneous and unplanned and perfect, and she'd said yes while holding one of Elena's tiny socks. But he'd never properly given her a ring. He dropped to one knee right there in the hallway, in front of the faded, muddy footprints, and opened the box. Inside was a simple but elegant ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "Rosa Delgado, you walked into my life following a 3-year-old who'd left muddy footprints in my hallway. You brought chaos and joy and love into a space that had been empty for too long. You showed me that the best things in life are messy and unpredictable and absolutely worth it." He took her hand. "Will you marry me? Officially, properly, with a ring and everything?" Rosa was crying, of course, but laughing too. "You already asked me 6 months ago." "I know, but I wanted to do it right. And I wanted to do it here, where it all started." "Because of the footprints," Rosa said softly, understanding. "Because of the footprints." "Then yes."
Again, yes.
"Always yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that Elena interrupted with an excited squeal. "Does this mean we're having a wedding party today?" "It does indeed," Alexander confirmed. The party was small and intimate, just close friends and the staff who'd become family. Maria cried through the entire ceremony. Jennifer, Alexander's assistant, kept taking photos and declaring that she'd known all along this would happen. Rose's aunt gave a blessing in Spanish that made everyone tear up even if they didn't understand all the words. And Elena, as flower girl, took her job incredibly seriously, carefully dropping petals along the makeshift aisle they'd created in the living room. When the officiant pronounced them married, Alexander kissed his wife while their daughter cheered and threw more flower petals in celebration.